What's up? How's everybody? Really? That's awesome. Thank you. It's good to be back. Y'all are a lively bunch today. We go on vacation with little kids. It's not really like you come back exhausted, right? I'm going to continue today in our series, The Journey, and if you're new today, if you're just joining us, then we're talking about the things that we can do, like tangible, real-life things that we can do to have the most out of life that life has to offer. Now, I have to start by telling you that I believe with all of my heart that a life in God is the only way to have real life. I've tried life outside of God, and what I found was it was a disaster. And I ended up broken and empty and tired and never fulfilled and never satisfied. But what I found was when I was resurrected from the dead and transformed and changed into a different person, and that's when God changed me. He made himself known to me and became real to me. And like most people would believe in God, they would say, yeah, there's a God, but you're kind of like, oh, well, there's a God, but he's out there somewhere, and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to go to church occasionally, and we're going to call that Christian or whatever. But that wasn't what I got. I got this whole resurrection experience. And when I encountered that there is a real God, and that he is really alive, and that he really cares and loves me deeply, it transformed me. It changed me into a different person, and I found that there was life in that. And the more I walk in his will, the more I walk in his ways, the more I experience what I believe real life is. And I used to have this, in my old life, I used to have this idea that if I was living, even though I was chasing the wind, I was living this fun, exciting life, but it really wasn't, but it had to look that way to everybody else. Because there was always the potential for it. It's the way I felt. But then when I experienced God, I found that this life wasn't as boring as I thought it would be. This life, I always saw the Christian life or the life pursuing God as, God, man, what a bunch of losers, and just those people don't get it, you know. I don't get it either, but they definitely don't get it. But the reason is because I think most people that claim Christianity don't get it. I think they're trying to live this life that looks this certain way of this idea they have about God, but they've never really experienced the real life in God. See, God created you, and he loves you, and you are uniquely created. Here's how I know that. There was a lot of you guys that liked the first song we played. Then there was a lot of you guys that liked when we got in the middle there. And then there were some of you guys that wanted to stand up during the offering. So we're all very uniquely created. Now that's the real you, because outside every one of you look the same. Because you're like, I don't know if this is okay in church or not. You are uniquely created and you are uniquely made. I have drive and passion. I have things that I love and things that I can't stand. You have things that drive you. You have passions, and God placed those passions inside of you. He created you uniquely to be you. There are certain things that make you you, and only you can be you. But I think the idea of Christianity is that it's cookie cutter. We have to look like this, do this, dress like this, talk like this, put this, fish on my car or motorcycle, whatever it be. It's like we have this image, and then you have this image of what it's like to be worldly. And this one's all dark and bad and evil, and this one's all plastic. But what I found is that I wasn't all dark. Like when I was completely dead in God, like chasing the wind, I wasn't all dark and angry. I mean, I was pursuing, I would say if anything, I was addicted to a good time. Like if there wasn't a good time involved, then I didn't really want any part of it. And that's why I rejected Christianity so strongly, because I saw nothing that was good or fun in it. But that's the way I'm wired. Now, there are a lot of evil, bad things in the world, but I don't believe that's most of it. I believe most of the world is made up of people just wandering around. Just zombies. Just walking along any path, following the leader, head down, getting through, looking for the next weekend, trying to make it till the next paycheck or whatever. But man, that just so much felt like my life was slipping away, like it was being stolen from me. And you don't have to live that way, and you weren't created to live that way. You were created to live out full of passion, full of drive. You were supposed to have the most part of life. You know why? Because we were created to be worshipers. It's the way we were wired. Every single one, and a lot of you guys are like, man, I've never even been to church in my life. What do you mean I was created to be a worshiper? I don't even believe in God. What do you mean I was created to be a worshiper? Well, today we're going to talk about to me, one of the most complicated but probably easiest parts of the journey that leads to life, and that's worship. Now, a lot of you guys are probably just checked out because you're like, oh my gosh, here we go again. But the truth is, we are all worshipers. We all gravitate our worship, or the actual word that's translated worship in the Bible is a word that can mean the same thing as serve. We're all servants of, or servants to something. And so, what I say worship is dedicating and committing and serving with my whole life, every part of me, the one thing or the few things that I believe gives life. So before I ever knew God, or before I even cared about God, I would say I was a dedicated worshiper. I just worship parties. You know, I mean, it was like, I really felt like that was the one thing that gave life, because I sure didn't think my job was. Hello? Wow. I didn't think that the church had anything to do that would give life, or that would be that way. I didn't see, because of the God I saw in the world, from my scope, my perspective, I didn't see that giving life. But I thought parties were life, because people seemed to smile and laugh and tell stories, and you know, it was what I saw as being life. And so I would say that I worshiped that. But that always ended, didn't it? It always stops. And whatever it is that you're worshiping outside of the real, true, living God, it's going to stop. It's going to end. It always does, doesn't it? And I don't care if it's meth. I don't care if it's alcohol. I don't care if it's parties. I don't care if it's sex. I don't care if it's pornography. I don't care what it is that you're worshiping, that we're shaping and focusing our lives on, that our lives revolve around. It's all ends, and it all leaves us wanting more. I describe it as like this feeling that I almost achieved it, but it was just out of grasp. And how frustrating is it to live that way? How frustrating is it to always be almost experiencing life? And then at some point, man, you realize that it's never going to work. And then it turns into depression. Then it turns into addiction. Then it turns into all... the thing that you worship will eventually control you. The thing you decide to serve will control you. If it's a good time, guess what it starts to do? You start out pursuing it, but sooner or later it's got you. It owns you. I'll give you an example. The party. I worshiped the party. But then I found that there were certain places I couldn't go. Like, I'd tell Celia, we're not going to a movie. You know why? You can drink at a movie. People don't get rowdy in movies. We didn't see a movie for 10 years. And it has control over you. It dictates where you go. It dictates who you hang out with. It starts to dictate what you and who you worship starts to dictate every part of your lives. It starts to dictate where you spend your money. It starts to dictate what you read. It starts to dictate where you go. So today, as we think about and unpack what worship really is, we've talked about all these steps in the journey, all these paths that keep us, all these things we can do, tangible things to keep us on the right path. And we talked about just going to church. Going to church. We talked about reading our Bibles, just simply reading the Bible. Not studying, not breaking down, not becoming a scholar, but just simply opening up the Bible and reading it. We talked about serving each other. Genuinely giving ourselves, our time to serve and make other people's lives around us better. And we talked about giving. Last week, Scott talked about prayer. We talked about the week before, we talked about giving, what we give our money to. Last week, Scott was talking about prayer, conversations with God, a relationship with God. And when you look at all of those things they are worship, aren't they? Because when we look at all of these things tied together, the one thing that we believe gives life is where we go. It's what we read and study and learn about. It's what we become informed about, right? I know this guy, man, and he's like a connoisseur of beers. Like, he thinks he's fancy. He's just alcoholic, but he thinks he's fancy. Because he like does all these beer tastings and stuff. And they got 47 different kinds of beer. Look, I drink a lot of beer. After a couple, I don't care if there's 75 different kinds, right? It's just beer at that point. So it's what we learn about. It's what we read. It's where we go. It's what we give our money to, isn't it? Man, when I quit drinking, and that was a whole different thing, but when I quit drinking, I didn't realize how much money was involved. When you worship that God, it's not a tithe. Like it's way in excess of a tithe. It's what we give our money to. It's what we serve. It's how we interact with the world around us. And when it comes right down to it, man, it's what we trust and depend on to give us life. Like, it's what we pray to. Because we believe that God gives us life, so we commit and we pray and we depend on and trust that God to give life. But that's not the way it works. It'll never, ever end. It'll never stop. You get into a trap and all of a sudden that God begins to control and dictate every part of our lives, and it's destructive. But then we come into, and hopefully you have come into and found out there's something more. There's this drawing, there's this force. And when I feel it, it causes great tension. But when I give into it, it causes peace and relief and joy and goodness. And it may be in little spurts here and there, maybe during a song, or maybe at some time in your life, some special time, or some time of struggle, or just hurt or pain or whatever it is that you're going through, maybe in a time of hopelessness where you just break down and you cry out and you say, it's like I don't know what this is because I went to Sunday school when I was a kid and I said the prayer, but I've never had this. And what it is, it's the real life God. It's the one, not the plastic Jesus that hangs up, or the picture of the bearded Jesus, the serious eyes, or the Jesus in the nightgown. It's none of those. It's like something that is so authentic and real, and it's relevant, and you feel it and you experience it, and you know that something is talking to you. Someone is communicating with you. Sometimes you just know that you're being held. And when you experience that real life God, that love, that's the thing that gives life. And then if we see that and we seek after that and we pursue that gives life, that's called worshiping the true and living God. And when we start to do that and we start to gather with people who worship this living God and who pursue this living God, and we start to read and we start to read about this living God, we start to talk to this living God, and we start to give what's valuable to us to this living God, all of a sudden our lives start to change and we start to experience real life. And this is the essence of worship. It's called sacrifice. Now, love is sacrifice. You can't say you love something without it costing you. Like even when you're in elementary school and you're like, I just love him. It's going to cost you. It costs you vulnerability. It costs you the chance of telling your little friends that I'm in love. Or maybe it costs you because you have to go stand by the office because you hit them. Because that's what you do when you fall in love. You kick them and you run from them. You pull their hair. That's how you fall in love. And so there's always a cost. So love is sacrifice. And God says the first commandment is to love God with all of your heart. And so many times we're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what that means. I don't even know how to do that. And so we can't figure that out. But love is sacrifice. And then there's this writer in the New Testament named Paul. And he writes in Romans chapter 12, he's writing this, and he says, Romans chapter 12, verse 1, he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. See, we say, what is worship? What is true worship look like? I had a pastor ask me one time, I was young and dumb and, doing my thing. And he asked me what worship was, and I was describing all this music styles and things. And he said, but isn't it more than that? It's not just that, but isn't it more than that? And he said, isn't it presenting ourselves, our whole selves, as a sacrifice? In essence, is what Jesus said, isn't it loving God first, above all other things? And if you take the definition of worship to be the servant of or serving that which you believe gives life, then wouldn't worship, true worship, be presenting my whole self in service to that one true God that I believe gives life? And if I really, really, really believe that God is the source of life, if I believe that, if I believe God is real, if I believe that God is the source of life, then wouldn't it make sense for me to take every part of my life and center it on Him? So then that draws in the question, do I believe that God is real? Do I believe He is the source of life? Or do I believe that I am the creator and I can create life outside of Him and away from Him? Or do I believe that some substance of this world is the source of life and that it can give life? And if we talk about it, we're going to say, parties really can't give life. And we realize that because that would just be ignorant, right? And we would say, well, evolution gives life. And we think about that a while, and we're like, well, that doesn't seem to be right. It doesn't seem to be working out. Because the question is, where does that come from? And so we think about it some more, and we come to a conclusion, and you'll hear this, that there's something out there. Well, there is. We call that something God, though. There was this guy, that same guy, Paul, he's walking through the city of Athens, and they really think they're just like all the smartest people in the world, and they're all the philosophers, and they're all the intelligent people, and he's walking around going, man, you got gods all over this city. And they're like, yeah, so proud. Yeah, we got gods everywhere. And he says, what about this God? And it was a what do you call those things? Idol to the unknown God. Because you have to have them all covered, and if you forget one, you call it the unknown God. And he says, I'm interested in this God, the unknown God. Let me tell you about Him. Because all of these physical, tangible things in life that we touch and feel and sense and all that, they don't give life. They are all servant to the one thing that does give life. There is an unknown God. There is an invisible God. There is a God, but that doesn't make Him any less real. And once you experience Him, and once you meet Him, and once you talk with Him, you understand that He is real, and He's beyond the scope of what we could create. And when we believe that He is the source of life, then wouldn't it make sense that all of our other parts of our life come into focus around that one thing, that one true God, that one thing that gives life? Well, we do. We call that worship. And when we center our whole lives, when we present ourselves as living sacrifices, when we love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that's worship. There's this lady in the New Testament, in the book of John, Jesus is talking to, and He's talking to her about the coming of Messiah. And she says, well, we worship here, and the Jews say we have to worship over there. And Jesus says to her, there's a time that's coming, and then He says this phrase after it, and is now when true worshipers will worship in spirit and truth. And that was confusing, and that's confusing to me. I read that and I'm like, what is that? What is He even saying? And then He says this. He says, God is spirit, and true worshipers must worship Him in spirit and truth. So what does that look like? How do we worship in spirit? I want to talk a little bit about this series has been more on the tangible side. So I want to spend some time talking about worshiping God in spirit and in truth. But I want to tie it to the thing that our mind first goes to when we think of worship. And I want to talk about music. Because music is a huge part of worship. Now, it's not, I think we wrongly call the music service worship, because it's as we give, that's worship, and as we teach, that's worship, and as we focus our lives and our being on God, that's worship, and all these things are worship. But have you noticed something, and I'm not just talking about church music, have you noticed something about music, that really good music, and I mean good, strong music, good lyrics, good music that's filled with passion, it comes from somewhere, doesn't it? Now, I don't care what kind of music it is, it comes from somewhere. I mean, like if you take these bands that are like, you know, that's coming from somewhere, right? Now, there's people that say that's good music. I'm not one of them. But there is people that say that's good music, but that's coming from somewhere. Music seems to express who we really are. Music seems to have this way of expressing and saying more than we can say with words, doesn't it? Music is emotion. Music is passion. It's things that are within us and inside of us, and that things that touch us. When you listen to a Taylor Swift song, and we're just touched with the high school guy who jacked us. You know? Because that's what they're all about. You listen to, you may listen to country music. I don't know why. We'll pray for you. I don't know why you would do that. But it's coming from somewhere, right? Some depressed, dark hole somewhere. Oh my gosh. I actually was listening to John Mellencamp this weekend, and I'm like, that comes from somewhere. And the reason in this part of the country that touches a chord with people, that kind of music, because it comes from a place of a small town, of a frustration, of a fight, or a wanting to get out of this, but also a passion and a drive to be part of this. And so it's real family and community, and it's about things that we're familiar with. So when we listen to that, we go, man, I know exactly what he's talking about. I know the experience, and we read in between the lyrics and the lines, and we feel the music. And it's like that for whatever music that you're connected to, or whatever music drives you. And that's why music and worship are tied together. And it's a strong, strong tie. God created sound. He created music. He created these notes. It's from the beginning of time, these people have been hitting things and strumming things and tapping on things to make these rhythms that make us feel. And they move us, and they mean things to us. And the Bible's full of these songwriters, and we don't realize that a lot of the Old Testament is just cries out of songs. Like, you can sing these scriptures. When the New Testament started, when you read about them meeting in these groups, the church or the gatherings, they would sing these songs. They would call them hymns. But what the hymns were these old writings, these ancient writings that were expressions of songs. Moses, man, he wants to teach the children of Israel so they can teach their children, so they'll never forget what happened when they came out of bondage and how God delivered them and how God was taking them to the promised land. And so right before Moses dies, he wants to teach them something they will never forget. And what's he do? He teaches them a song. He said, you learn this song, and then you teach this song to your children. And they'll teach it to their children, and this song will be here for all generations. And the reason we have these writings is because you remember songs. They get stuck in you. They become part of you. And so worship and music and God and music and these songs, it all becomes one thing. It's not separate things, right? And there's a kind of life to it. And what we've experienced and what we've discovered here is that there's a flow to it. And you may not like our sound or our lights or our worship or experience at all, but there is a reason for it, because it does something to our hearts. It does something to us. We connect, and it changes the air in the room. And I'm gonna let you in on top secret, okay? This is very top secret. Don't tell anybody else this. This is just for us. Like, the way Celia crafts our worship set is it's very specific. Have you noticed? You may not ever have paid attention. You may have never noticed, but there's There is a flow to it. And it's much like a loving relationship. It's the way we interact with each other. It starts out light and playful. Have you noticed that? That it's real upbeat and real exciting. It's like the first time you meet your wife. You know, you may pull her hair or wrote her a note that said, you know, do you like me? Or whatever. They sent your friend over to ask her out for you. Whatever it was. It created all those excitements and the potential and all these things. And so it's fun and it's exciting and it's kind of driven and it gets us excited and pumped up and it starts to draw us in. And a lot of you, I know you walk in, you go, oh my God, it's too early. Please just stop. But it's for a reason. Because it's that playful excitement that starts to draw us in and gets us moving and thinking and gets our blood pumping. And then it starts to ease into a little bit less, and it's more of a just transitional type, like I'm moving from this to this other place. So it starts to maybe come down a little bit, and it starts to have more meaning and more emotion and more connection to it. And then it goes into this time where it starts to feel heavy. You know, you start to experience that connection and it makes you stop and you slow down and you think and you're like, wow, I'm feeling something. And a lot of us reject that. Like, we're like, I'm starting to feel something, I don't like it. Because when you're running from God, there's nothing more uncomfortable than worship. I've been there, man. I used to despise worship. Gosh, that's when God would try things on me. He's always trying things. But that's the part where we start to feel that and we feel that weight and that emotion and starts to move us. Man, that's when you get, dust in your eye. It's like, not me. I got to go to the bathroom. I've been dying. Like, you only been here 10 minutes. We try to escape that because sometimes the presence of God is just too much. I mean, the presence of God is heavy. And if you notice how real worshipers, and I so much see Celia and I watch her and she's an authentic worshiper. You can tell the minute she disconnects from you and she's gone. And it's it's fun to watch. I mean, because I'm just wow, man, I'd like to go there, And she leads us and takes us there. And it's like that tent of David. The difference in the tent of David was they worshiped face to face before God and they sang and they danced. And David had musicians that played 24/7 around the clock. He never wanted worship to stop outside that tent. That was a place where they could worship with God. And so that time and excitement and just being in the presence of God is heavy. And it's like, when you're dating, it's fun. First, it's all fun. Then you go on a couple of dates, and then you start having serious talks. And then all of a sudden, man, it's like, will you marry me? And then you're like, what did I do? You can't breathe and you can't function. And you're like, I know I need to do this, but I can't. I'm leaving. I'm running. I'm getting out of here, and you're in this dilemma. And then all of a sudden you're standing there and you're saying, I do, and your feet are hurting and shaking and your legs are numb and you can't get up. That's worship, It's that terrifying, exciting time of being in the presence of God. And then as you're young and married, man, you're just so in love and everything's just, man, you're like, what do you want to do? Oh, whatever you want to do. And and that's where the worship kind of goes. It goes into that place of getting to know this God and this experience that we've had. And then she brings it out of that into this time of just peace and comfort. Where you get to that point in your relationship, in your marriage, where you don't really have to talk because you just know. And it's comfortable and it's peaceful and you're on the same page and you're going the same direction and you're like, it's just a familiarity. It's and when you come out of that deep, intimate time with God and you come out, she brings us to this place where it's like, wow, this isn't heavy anymore, it's just good. It's just peaceful, and we kind of end. And the reason she does all of this and the reason we worship with music this way is it moves us into a time where we focus, where we can hear God. Because what I have to say to you is really irrelevant. Because it doesn't matter what I tell you. You won't remember it when you leave here. The only thing you will ever remember when you leave here is what God says to you. It's all you'll ever remember. I've never had anybody remember anything I've ever said. So I just talk long enough to waste time so it's not quiet in here while God's talking to you. So when everybody's heard what they need to hear from God, then we say a prayer and call it a day. And this is how we have a worship experience. Now everybody is different in their approach to worship. Like Celia, man, she's an all-out there worshiper. She's like, and I'm like, I don't even know that. And I'm worshiping just the same. Then there's ugly worshipers. And you may be an ugly worshiper, and that's cool. We turn out the lights for you. It's all right. And then there's the out-of-key, sing as loud as you can worshiper, which is cool because we turn the sound up where you can't hear it. We do all of this so we can accommodate all of this worship, because worship is a corporate experience, but it's very personal and very private. And so we all experience it different ways, man. There's some people, and I know some of you guys like to just stand out in the hall and worship. Because you don't want to see or hear any of this. But it's your time to just get in tune with God on your own. Well, that's cool. It doesn't matter. We're all different. We're all uniquely created. Some of us like loud, heavy guitars. Some of us like kicking drums. Man, my theory is worship doesn't work unless you can feel the kick drum in your chest. That's the way I feel about it, man, because there's something God does in a bass note. Like the Holy Spirit becomes real, and you feel it. And it's not that you hear the music and see it, it's that you feel it and you experience the whole thing. And it all becomes part of this experience with God. And we're all unique in how we take it on. Some people like it quiet and subdued. Some people like it loud. Some people like it powerful and driven. Some people like it soft and stringy and piano-y. And it doesn't matter, because you were uniquely created. God has made you the way you are for a reason. And there's all kinds of worship. So I can't say this is worship and this isn't. This is, this is certified worship music, and this is unauthorized worship music. The thing is, what we have to understand is we have to know that worship is God and us in a relationship, and us experiencing and serving Him with whoever and whatever we are. And most of the time, what worship is about is the presence of God being made manifest. The word manifest means to be made known. Worship is so that we know God is here. In the physical, tangible, real world sense, like there is a God and He's here and I know it. And when I walk out of here, or when I walk in here, it feels different. And I can't explain that to you. It just feels different. And that's part of the worship experience. So there's no right way to do it, no wrong way to do it. There's only us expressing and experiencing the presence of God. I used to do this teaching on worship, and I heard it and I thought it was good, and I redid it because there's a lot of complaining about worship. because I like this or I don't like that, or it's too this or it's too that. And I was one of them, because there's sometimes like God won't even show up. It's so bad. God's like, man, I don't know about that. I didn't create that. Like, I don't know where that came from. That's on the dark side. I'm that way about like bellowing organ. Whoa! And I'm like, oh, God hates this. I know he's got to. I don't know. He shows up there too. Happens. I used to say, though, that we need to get over it because, you know, if you don't like worship, it's because it's not about you. Like, that's, I mean, the truth is we're here it's not for us. But in a way, it is. And it's not the style or the sound or the talent or any of those things. Now, bad talent can really subdue the worship experience. I've been there. But it is about you experiencing God. And in anything that we can do to isolate distractions from experience in the presence and the realness of God, we try to do. A lot of people, like, I wouldn't say griping, because that's not a good way to put it, but when people gripe, they gripe about the lights being too dark in here, it's too dark, or it's too loud, or the stage lighting, or the sound, or whatever. I mean, you know, we all have our opinions. Everybody's got one. But we turn out the lights so there's not as many distractions. And we talk about how our lighting on our stage works to visually enhance the movement and the presence of God. It's not emotionalism. We don't try to create emotion. Like, if you want to create emotion, man, I'll play you a sad song. I can make you cry. I'll tell you a sad story. But that's not what it's about, because creating emotion isn't godly. It's just an emotion. What we try to do is offer an environment for the presence of God to move upon you, speak to you, and transform and change you into a new and different person. And He's given us all of these people and all of these tools and all of these things at our disposal so we can isolate some of the distractions, some of the things that people are trying to do to take us out of that environment. It's very important that when we're with God and when we're corporately worshiping, that we're present and that we are focused on Him and He's focused on us, and that we're having a conversation, and that it's a dance, and that it's moving, and that it's going somewhere. And so this is how worship works in the journey, in our tangible journey, just like going to church and reading our Bible and praying and giving and serving. We worship. Worship will change the air. Worship music that is God-centered and God-focused, that expresses that thing that some artist communicates that comes from within. It'll change the air in the room. I want you to try this. This is very tangible. If you're having a bad day and you're very angry or you're just ticked off, you ever just get ticked off? Like I do. Maybe I'm the only one. But sometimes you're just on edge, or you're just depressed, or you're just anxious about something. I challenge you to find some worship music and play it. Because it'll change the air in your car. It'll change the air in your bathroom, and some of you need that. It changes the air. It changes the air in the room. It changes the feeling, the emotion in the room. It's positive and peaceful. It's moving forward, not backward. It's moving toward life, not away from life. There's so much of the music that's out there that is death feeding. it's driven by anger and rage and bitterness and hurt and pain and disgust and frustration. And so many times we listen to that because we're relating to it. And so we're drawn into it. It's real easy to get connected with that type of anger and drive and just, passion. I mean, I think this is why rap music and hip hop is so strong, because people relate to the lyrics and they connect with it, and they're like, yeah, that's me and that's my voice, and that's good that you relate to it. It's bad that you're connecting to it. Because when you start connecting with that, it's not life-giving. But I'm real picky with my music. Like, I don't like a lot of worship music, most of it. But there are bands like Jesus Culture is one worship band that we play a lot of their music because it comes from a place of passion and drive, but it's very good musically. And there's something about putting on a Jesus Culture worship CD that will just change your room. Some of you guys like maybe Chris Tomlin or some of these other bands. There's a million bands out there from a million different genres of music. Find something that you relate to musically and play it. And I'm telling you, it will help you in your times of need and struggle and hurt and just anger and everything else. It just changes everything. It's what happens when we come in here. The music changes everything, gets us in line with what we want to accomplish here. So those are just some things, some thoughts, some things I hope that you can take with you, that you understand about the way God works and interacts with us, and the power music has on us, and that worship is a huge part of our journey and that journey into life. You guys stand up with me. I want to pray for you, and then we'll dismiss.